For decades, we lived in a world with an open, rules-based economic system, and it created a ton of prosperity. But that system, it's in serious trouble now. So in this explainer, we're going to break down the 2025 Per Jacobson lecture, which asks a huge question. In a world that feels so divided, how do we even begin to fix our global order and find a shared purpose again?
The lecture's main speaker, Singapore's President Tharman Shanmugaratnam, really doesn't pull any punches. He kicks things off with this pretty stark warning you see here. The whole idea of countries working together is weaker now than it's been in 80 years. I mean, think about that. That's the scale of the challenge we're up against.
And this really gets to the heart of the paradox we're living through. On one side, the promise, a system that literally pulled 1 billion people out of poverty in just the last 25 years. Incredible. But then, there's the reality, this rise of me-first nationalism and a total crisis of faith in the system, even from the countries that built it. So how on earth did we get here?
Right, so before we can even think about where we're going, we've got to understand what went wrong. Let's start with the diagnosis and take a hard look at the fractures that have shattered the old global system. This is really the million-dollar question, isn't it? The benefits of this global order were massive. They were real. So why are so many people so unhappy? Why does the whole thing feel so broken?
Well, the lecture boils it down to 3 main reasons. First, this spread of zero-sum thinking. The idea that for me to win, you have to lose. Second, a huge policy failure. Governments just didn't do enough to help the people who were left behind by globalization. And third, the United States, which for a long time was the main supporter of the system, has been slowly but surely backing away from that leadership role.
And that retreat by the US, it brings up this classic and frankly pretty worrying idea from economics, the Kindleberger trap. It's all about what happens when the top dog steps back and nobody else steps up to fill the void. You get a leadership vacuum and things can spiral into disorder really, really fast. It's a huge historical warning for right now.
Now, of all the cracks in the global order, there is one that is basically a giant fault line, and that's the relationship between the US and China. How these two superpowers manage their relationship is pretty much going to define the rest of this century, for all of us.
Okay, this is where things get really fascinating. President Tharman brings in this cool idea from biology to talk about the US and China. It's called an ecotone. Imagine where a forest meets a meadow. That edge zone, it isn't dead space. It's usually the most creative, most diverse, most buzzing part of the whole area. His argument is, what if the US-China relationship could be like that, a super productive zone of competition and interaction?
But, and this is a big but, not everyone sees it that way. The lecture really laid out 2 completely different takes on this. You've got Tharman's ecotone view, which sees it as an opportunity, maybe even an engine for innovation. But then you have the other side, voiced by former US official Lyle Brainerd, saying no, China's state-run economy has warped the whole system and our institutions just weren't built for it. And look, these aren't small disagreements. We're talking about 2 totally different ways of seeing the problem.
And the stakes for getting this wrong are just massive. The alternative to that managed ecotone is something called bifurcation, basically the world splitting in 2. Imagine separate tech worlds, separate financial systems, separate internets. As President Tharman warns, a world like that isn't just poor, it's profoundly dangerous.
So, if that's the diagnosis of the problem, what's the cure? The good news is, the lecture doesn't just leave us with the problems. It actually tries to lay out a blueprint for how we could forge a new path forward.
And that path forward really seems to rest on 3 main pillars. First, things have to start at home, with a serious focus on creating good jobs and actually helping workers who get left behind. Second, the big global institutions, like the World Trade Organization, are old and need a major update. And third, maybe we stop waiting for everyone to agree on everything. Instead, we use flexible groups of countries, coalitions of the willing, to lead the way. To really get a sense of why that first pillar, good jobs, is so critical, just look at this number. It's staggering. In the next 10 years, 1.2 billion young people are going to be looking for work. And on our current path, we're going to come up 800 million jobs short. That's not just a statistic. That is a recipe for a massive global crisis. So, that brings us to Pillar 2, fixing the big institutions. The lecture gets really specific about the WTO. The plan? Get rid of the rule that lets one single country block everything. Make sure special treatment for developing countries actually goes to the countries that need it. Create new rules to stop these crazy subsidy races. And use smaller, regional deals as test labs for rules that could one day go global. So, all of this brings us right back to that title. We are at a critical moment in history, and the future isn't set in stone.
We're facing a fundamental choice between just letting things slide into chaos or doing the incredibly hard work of rebuilding. And that's why it's called an era of possibility, because anything could happen for better or for worse.
Look, nobody's saying this is going to be easy. There's no magic bullet here. But as President Tharman says at the end, the responsibility to act is still there. His final message is really a call to action, a call for bold leadership. Because in his words, this is absolutely no time for timidity.
And that's really the question we're all left with, isn't it? The old way of doing things is breaking down, but the next chapter hasn't been written yet. So are we going to slide into disorder, or are we going to seize this moment and build something new, an actual era of possibility? The choice, ultimately, is ours to make.